Boris loved going for walks in the forest with his dog Bruno, but that evening, his usual path became a labyrinth of shadows and darkness. The trees seemed to shift. The paths turned into confusing aberrations. He didn't know where he was or where he had to go. He had neither anything to eat nor anything to drink. Panic spread through him. Boris tried to keep calm, but his worries grew with every passing second. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the treetops, Boris suddenly heard the crackling of branches behind him. He quickened his pace, but the crackling followed him like an eerie echo. His dog was visibly frightened, but he barked in the direction of the sound in order to protect his owner. Boris tried to make out what was running after him in the darkness, but there was absolutely nothing to be seen in the darkness. His dog barked as if possessed. Finally, he rushed into the darkness to find the unknown. For a brief moment, the barking became louder than Boris had ever heard it before. But then there was a short howl from the dog, and then everything was completely silent. Boris panicked. His heart was pounding and he could hardly breathe. He called out for Bruno, but all he got in reply was a sinister laugh. Suddenly, a man in a long coat and an old weathered hood stood in front of him. His face was barely recognizable in the darkness. "You are lost, young man," the stranger's voice said gloomily. In his right hand he held a bloody hatchet, and with his left he dragged the dead dog by the neck across the ground. Boris felt a shiver run down his spine. He turned and ran, but the forest seemed to be conspiring against him. The stranger followed him silently, always present, no matter in which direction Boris fled. Eventually, Boris managed to reach a clearing. He saw a lonely hut and rushed inside, slamming the door behind him. He was breathing heavily. Boris leaned against the door and pushed against it with all his strength. He tried as hard as he could to hold his breath so as not to make a sound. There was pure silence. Boris could feel his heart beating throughout his body. He was drenched in sweat. His dog was dead. Bruno was his best friend. The grief shook Boris to the core. He couldn't hold back the tears. But then he heard the crunching of the forest floor from outside. All at once, pure adrenaline shot through Boris's body. He reached for his knife. He pleaded silently that the stranger would not find him. Once again, there was silence. The few seconds felt like an eternity. But then, a loud thud sounded. The pursuer struck the door several times with his hatchet. He pushed against the door with all his strength. Boris held out against it. His arms were burning with exertion. The pursuer laughed and said, "Come out, I just want to play with you." Boris could no longer hold back, and the gap in the door got bigger and bigger. Finally, the stranger managed to push Boris away with the door. Now they were standing opposite each other in the small, dark hut. Only the bright moonlight provided some light and illuminated the inside of the hut. The stranger's silhouette was absolutely terrifying. There was no way out. Boris could not escape. Now it was either kill or be killed. This is where the story ends. How it will continue is up to you. Will Boris manage to kill the attacker, or will he be the next victim of the merciless murderer? Let your creativity run wild and write your own version in the comments.